All right. Good morning. It's Sunday, October the 18th. This is our Sunday school lesson for today. Get the Bible up real quick. All right. Okay, the lesson this morning in the study guide, it's session 9, page 82, if you've got a study guide. And the title of the lesson is called Staying Sober. And the subtitle is God Expects Believers to be Good Stewards of the Bodies He Has Given Them. There's two just separate passages today. It's coming from Proverbs 23, verses 17 through 21, and then verses 29 through 35. And as the name of the lesson implies, staying sober, the introduction says, alcoholism and drug abuse have become a prominent feature of our cultural landscape. Lives have been destroyed, marriages ruined, families wounded, and communities disrupted because of its destructive influence. Some of us worry that our children or grandchildren will be caught in its grip. Others of us worry that someone we love will never be set free from his or her addiction. And my only addiction in the past was with tobacco, and praise the Lord, I'm over that. But it was a challenge, as anyone who has suffered through an addiction of any kind knows. And of course, anything that's addictive, you have to be very careful with, because an addiction, by its nature, tends to drive your life and kind of how you think and what you do. And in some cases, more than others, and in some cases, perhaps more destructive than other things. Health effects notwithstanding, it can affect your life in ways that cause you to act in a way that's completely different to your normal character. And we'll talk a little bit about that. But so before we read the verses, in the understand the context, it mentions that the verses, Proverbs 22:17 through 24:22, so about 2 chapters worth, it's been called by some Bible teachers, it quotes the 30 wise sayings of Solomon. And it says, in staccato fashion, or very quickly, one right after the other, Solomon poured out precept after precept, layered on top of the foundational truths he set forth in the previous chapters, especially chapters 1 through 9. It says, 4 things are remarkable about Solomon's counsel in this passage, and that's again from 22:17 to 24:22, the 30 wise sayings. 4 things are remarkable about Solomon's counsel in this passage. First of all, it says the wisdom of God revealed in his word covers a wide variety of issues. Solomon left no stone unturned in giving wise instruction to God's people about many issues of life. And it's amazing, as I step out of this for a second, to think about how the things that God instructed Solomon to speak about thousands of years ago are still relevant today. So it shows you that human nature does not change. Second, it says the wisdom of God is soul-searching. That is, Solomon's counsel to God's people was personal and spiritual. He was not interested in surface issues, but rather matters of the heart. And I'll just say on that, a lot of Proverbs are kind of pithy, kind of quick one-liners. But even those, if you examine them, they're very deep. But these, again, as it says here, they're not surface issues, but matters of the heart. Third, and this is the one that really strikes me, it says Solomon's counsel is intensely practical. He was interested in making God's wisdom livable and not just theoretical. A lot of times as we read the Bible, people will debate about are things literal or symbolic or allegorical. But again, what the wisdom that Solomon is trying to put out in Proverbs is practical to help you with your daily life, not just this theoretical advice. And then finally, fourth, it says Solomon's counsel is relational in that he desired relationships with God to grow deeper and more mature in relationships with others. We do say that again. Fourth, Solomon's counsel is relational, and that he desired relationships with God to grow deeper and more mature, and relationship with others to grow more mature and loving. So relational in that we want to strengthen our relationship with God, make it more personal, more mature, and then with others around us to be more mature and loving, because that's what God would have us to do, is love those around us, which sometimes is difficult to do. So as far as the verses, I'll go ahead and read the two, both sets of scripture. So again, it's Proverbs 23, 17 through 21, and then 29 through 35. So I'll read it from King James, and then we'll go to CSB since that's what the study guide's in. Starting in Proverbs 23, 17 through 21, it says, "Let not thine heart envy sinners, but be thou in the fear of the Lord all the day long. For surely there is an end, and thine expectation shall not be cut off. Hear thou, my son, and be wise, and guide thine heart in the way. Be not among winebibbers, among riotous eaters of flesh. For the drunkard and the glutton shall come to poverty, and drowsiness shall clothe a man with rags." So there's the first set of verses, 17 through 21. Let's go to 29 through 35, and you'll see a little bit of a reinforcement of that. And again, that's kind of, remember, the name of the lesson is staying sober. So 29 through 35, it says, "Who hath woe? Who hath sorrow? Who hath contentions? Who hath babbling? Who hath wounds without cause? Who hath redness of eyes? They that tarry long at the wine, they that go to seek mixed wine. Look not thou upon the wine when it is red, when it giveth his color in the cup, when it moveth itself aright. At the last it biteth like a serpent, and stingeth like an adder. Thine eyes shall behold strange women, and thine heart shall utter perverse things. Yea, thou shalt be as he that lieth down in the midst of the sea, or as he that lieth upon the top of a mast. They have stricken me, thou shalt say, and I was not sick. They have beaten me, and I felt it not. When shall I awake? I will seek it yet again." So those are the verses. Let me put this on CSB. We'll go back to 17. Okay. All right. So even King James, Old English verbiage, it's relatively clear what he's talking about with respect to alcohol. At least to me, it was. Okay, so as we start to examine the study guide, I'm on page 83. At the bottom of the page, the first two verses that we're studying, 17 and 18, the subtitle is "The Promise." And to read the verses again, it says, "Don't let your heart envy sinners. Instead, always fear the Lord, for then you will have a future and your hope will not be dashed." So you hear the promise in verse 18, of course, and the warning or the admonishment in verse 17. On page 84 in the study guide, you'll see it if you've been with us going through these lessons for the last several weeks. You see a reinforcement again of a constant theme that was with Solomon. And from the study guide, it says from verse 17, "Those who fear the Lord and trust in him can count on a secure and hopeful future." So there's the admonishment as well as the promise. To help God's people know and understand this promise, Solomon gave two pieces of wise counsel. First, he returned to the principle first laid down in Proverbs 1:7. It is the fear and reverent awe of the Lord that is the basis of wisdom. Rather than developing a jealousy toward the worldly wisdom of the sinful and secular, Solomon directed God's people to stay grounded in loving and fearing the Lord. The fear of God tethers us to ultimate reality and unchanging truth. And the important thing to me about this, of course, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. That was kind of the paraphrase of chapter 1, verse 7, and that's a couple of places in the Bible. Is having that reverential awe and fear of the Lord is hopefully that gives you that's where your guidance, your wisdom starts. All right, but I like how in the study guide it kind of breaks this down, and again the verses, "Don't let your hearts envy sinners." Okay, and the way it says it in the study guide, rather than developing a jealousy toward the worldly wisdom of the sinful and secular. and particularly for young people uh, in middle school, high school, even when I was in middle school or junior high, as it was called then, there were kids at that age um, that would do things, uh, experiment, alcohol, drugs, and this is back in the 70s. And what I suspect is that even in this day, the middle school and high school are no different and perhaps worse. And I say that in that the temptation, you will see it if you have not already, as young people, and there will be a temptation to participate, whether it be for so that you fit in, for popularity, because you don't want to look different. And again, as the verse says, 17, don't let your heart envy sinners. And the study guide again, rather than developing a jealousy toward the worldly wisdom of the sinful and secular, Solomon directed God's people, and that's who we are, Christians. We are God's people, to stay grounded in loving and fearing the Lord. And hopefully, I don't really remember when I was in Sunday school back then, this specific lesson. And again, going through this whole series of Proverbs, it reinforces and reinforces particularly the fear of the Lord at the beginning of wisdom. But having that, of course, my parents, my dad, the disciplinarian, the primary disciplinarian in the house, was a little more direct as far as the things he did not want me or my brothers to do. Of course, drinking, drugs, poor behavior, bad language, all of that were things that it was very clear. That being said, people are people. And so even in my high school days, I kind of strayed from his guidance. Again, the reasons you do that, for me, it was more about trying to be part of a crowd, popular, rather than kind of looking different, which is a horrible reason to do things. And again, not having that, or at least I don't remember that constant reinforcement of do what is right by the Lord. Okay, put God first in your thoughts, your actions, your words, in your life, and if you do that, you'll have that basis, that background, that shield, that protection, that motivation maybe to help you resist the worldly wisdom of the sinful and secular, if you will. Okay, so I've lingered a bit on that, but again, trying to apply it practically. That's what they're saying. Don't let that jealousy toward the worldly wisdom, for whatever reason, sway you. Okay. The second part, again, in the study guide, it says uh, Solomon gave two pieces of wise counsel. First was that the fear of the Lord is that beginning of wisdom. The second one says, and from verse 18, the promise of God's presence assures a future hope. That's the second great truth that Solomon reminded God's people so that they might continually embrace the wisdom of God. Solomon combined two great themes of life, hope and wisdom. Walking in God's wisdom keeps alive the promise of a future with purpose and hope. To neglect the wisdom of God will cut short or stunt a future with purpose and hope. So there's a good basis for the lesson today. Keeping your eye on God as best you can, surrounding yourself with like-minded people, friends, and if you don't do that or can't do that, it makes you much more vulnerable. But even when you're on your own, uh, if you have God first, it will help you to resist that temptation when that comes along. All right, now on to verses 19 through 21. Okay, so here's where he starts to get the advice with respect to the lesson, which is stay sober. The subtitle is The Petition in the study guide for verses 19 through 21. And again, the verses, listen, my son, and be wise. Keep your mind on the right course. Don't associate with those who drink too much wine or with those who gorge themselves on meat. The drunkard and the glutton will become poor, and grogginess will clothe them in rags. What's significant about this as we go into the study guide again is two things he specifically talks about. One is drinking, and then also gluttony, which there's a lot of overweight, obesity in the world this day. I have my eating problems as well as far as overeating. I don't consider myself having an addiction per se in the context of, for example is alcohol. But it's interesting to me that he mentions both drinking of alcohol as well as gluttony, and we'll see why here in just a moment. So it says in the study guide, again, it says, listen, my son, and be wise. Keep your mind on the right course. Study guide says when Solomon referred to the mind in this verse, he meant the thinking process of God's people. Okay, listen, my son, and be wise. Keep your mind on the right course, the thinking process. How and what a person thinks, the study guide says, when it comes to the critical junctures of life, makes all the difference. And again, we've talked about the decisions that you make, hopefully with a basis of God's word and God in your life. That helps you to make those decisions, but that's what specifically this is speaking of. It says a sound mind filled with the wisdom of God will be better able to make the right choices and avoid the bad choices that can derail us throughout life. Hopefully that will help you to make good choices and avoid the bad choices. But now he's going to specifically speak about alcohol and substance abuse. All right. As an introduction, it says Solomon's instruction was for God's people to remain clear-headed. All right. Now, as we segue into the alcohol abuse here, again, verse 20 says, don't associate with those who drink too much wine or with those who gorge themselves on meat. And the study guide expands alcohol and substance abuse. So again, to relate it to today, alcohol and substance abuse, drugs, or whatever the substance may be, alcohol and substance abuse can cut short a person's potential and hope-filled future. So there's the bottom line, is any addiction. I mentioned tobacco earlier, smoking, chewing tobacco, they can affect your health, which literally can cause you to die earlier than you would have otherwise. So they can definitely affect your life and your health. However, alcohol and drugs in particular not just affect your life in that they may shorten it, they can and will affect your life as you live it. Okay, and that's where it says alcohol and substance abuse can cut short a person's potential and hope-filled future. All right. And again, he mentions alcohol and gluttony. In the study guide, it says both drunkenness and gluttony can lead to poverty of body and soul. Both alcohol and food sometimes function as medicines that numb us to the difficulties and pains of life. Okay? And if you've ever heard the expression comfort food, there's a reason for that. If you just had a bad day or if there's something going on in your life, particularly if you're sitting around later in the day or in the evening, but this is where I'm vulnerable, and you just think, I just feel like snacking on something. Well, rarely will I maybe go for the healthy food, an apple, grapes, something like that. You kind of want to go for the sweets or the salty chips and whatnot. Okay, that's not the definition to me of gluttony. Gluttony is just overeating in general. But again, when you talk about comfort food, and some people turn to alcohol or drugs as that escape, if you will, from the problems that they feel are overwhelming their life. Okay, so in the study guide, it says God's people are to trust God in difficult times, not turning to vices such as alcohol or overeating for comfort in the process. And again, what that comes down to is having a relationship with God that is personal, that is trusting, the knowledge that He will give you the strength when you need it, and believing that. And then leaning on God when you must, if you have things in your life that are problems. Okay, you go back to, again, specifically alcohol, and the study guide mentions eating as well, but it says the numbing effects of drunkenness and overeating are only short-term fixes for what may be a set of long-term problems. And I would say that they aren't fixes of any kind, short-term or long-term. They're masks. And it mentions the numbing effects of drunkenness, and I would throw in drugs as well, but it mentions overeating. And there is a numbing effect of overeating because you get very lethargic, sleepy sometimes when you overeat. Think about, your Thanksgiving dinner, or if you overeat it, how it kind of weighs you down, and now you need to take a nap. That is a physiological thing. Okay, so there is truly a numbing effect with overeating, but certainly with drunkenness or drugs. All right, so it says those are only short-term fixes for what may be a set of long-term problems. When the effects of self-medication, alcohol, drugs, and gluttony are gone, the problems will remain. So that's why you need to seek out and search the root of the problem rather than just mask it with these substitutes for God. In these verses, it says in the study guide, Solomon addresses two important yet sensitive issues. First, he addressed alcohol abuse. So again, over 2,000 years ago, he's addressing alcohol abuse. His counsel was simple: disassociate yourself from the abuse of alcohol. Now, that's a simple thing to say. And again, well, let me continue the lesson before I speak to alcohol consumption versus alcohol abuse. So let me go back. His counsel was simple: disassociate yourself from the abuse of alcohol. Abusing alcohol opens up the individual to all kinds of harm and causes a person to become entangled in a subculture that is often harmful, toxic, and detrimental to so many areas of life. So let me stop there and say I know personally many people who have had, again, it's one thing to want to be part of the crowd and to drink. Drugs are a completely different thing. But drinking was the more temptation when I was younger, to be part of the crowd. To have a drink, get inebriated, it can be harmful or fatal if you do things like drive or ride with someone who's been drinking and driving. But one drink of alcohol won't necessarily cause you permanent damage. The problem is when it gets to a point of abuse, okay? And I would say that abusing alcohol isn't necessarily alcoholism or addiction. Abusing is drinking into the point to where you lose control of your mental faculties, okay? So becoming inebriated, because now you really open yourself up to getting in trouble. Because if you don't have control of your mind and your body because of alcohol, you make yourself vulnerable to what can happen to you from external forces, other people, etc. Okay, so there's a difference between a sip, abuse, and then addiction. They are obviously stages of behavior. One could lead to the other. And I relate this, I've mentioned this before, very simply. I don't drink alcohol anymore because to me, I try to sit down and objectively think about what is gained by drinking alcohol. And some people would say, well, it loosens you up a little bit, relaxes you, makes you more social or sociable. I would say, I don't need that. And I don't need to be around the people that need that. It doesn't mean I'm going to abandon my friends, family, if they have a beer or have a glass of wine. To me, I just truly cannot think of a good reason to drink. It's expensive and it can lead to trouble, particularly if it's abused. And again, I've had in my life, I know of people that alcohol abuse literally, ultimately killed them. Okay. All right. And I know of other people that have gotten in trouble with the law for whatever, destructive behavior or drinking while driving, getting arrested for that. It affects you throughout your life. To have that DUI on your record affects you for your life. When you try to get a job, fill out a resume, you're going to probably be asked, have you ever been arrested? And if it's a DUI, that's an arrest. Drugs, that's an arrest. If you try to hide that and they subsequently find out, likely you'll lose your job for being dishonest on the application or in the interview. If you divulge it, which truth is always the best policy, even if you have to reveal mistakes that you made in your past, if you reveal it, depending on the nature of the job, they may say we can't take a risk because you've had behavior in the past that is dangerous. Flying an airplane, perhaps being in the military, being even a truck driver that has to have a commercial license. There are lots of things, doctor. Even if you made that mistake when you were young and have rehabilitated, that's never happened again. It's still on your record. So best to avoid it to begin. Okay. So to go back to the study guide again, in these verses, it says Solomon addressed two important yet sensitive issues. First, he addressed alcohol abuse. Second, Solomon addressed the often neglected issue of gluttony. A drunkard will keep on buying alcohol until all his money is gone. And I would say that applies to drugs as well. By the same token, it says Solomon warned that the glutton will become poor. Shoving food into our mouths generally leaves us groggy. And there's that physiological effect I mentioned earlier. The grogginess leaves us unable to be productive when we work. Think about that food coma, as it's called, about 1 or 2 in the afternoon if you have a big lunch, even after you've just had lunch, because your body has to digest that. It takes blood away from other parts of your body. It's physiological. You can learn that in science, but it takes blood away from other parts of your body, to include your brain, to process the food, to digest it. And for that reason, and I'm sure there are other, I'm not a doctor or scientist, but that's kind of basic. But it does affect you. It makes you groggy. It says as a result of our lack of control, so back to overeating or gluttony, we'll end up wearing rags. In our culture, we tend to abhor or hate or shun drunkenness, but we don't usually have the same attitude about gluttony. However, God's wisdom at work in us prompts us to treat both of them in the same way. Instead of giving in to them, we handle our difficult trials by trusting the Lord to help us get through the challenges of life. So again, it goes back to when that temptation presents itself, when you're feeling overwhelmed, when something's going on in your life, the best solution is not to seek out worldly solutions, secular cures, bad advice, alcohol, drugs, comfort food, overeating. It's to turn to God, turn to your like-minded brothers and sisters, Christians, not necessarily to reveal the intimate details of your problems, but and sometimes it may come to that, to a trusted person, a pastor, whoever it is, parent, hopefully, a trusted friend that you don't have to worry about gossiping, and Sunday school teacher, whoever it is that you can trust. But turn first to the Lord, and then lean on those around you that are like-minded. And even if it's just pray for me, I'm having some issues in my life, because that power of prayer is powerful. All right. Now, to finish this section, it says the consequences of alcohol abuse, and I would put in parentheses, and drugs, and gluttony are clear and stark. The consequences are physical, mental, financial, relational, and spiritual. How many lives have been wasted by alcohol and cut short by the effects of unhealthy habits? How many families have been ripped apart? God's people need to stay sharp, focused, and fully engaged in life, living within the guidelines of God's wisdom. So again, I know people in this church, and again, certainly in my family and friends. So let's just read that again. How many lives have been wasted by alcohol, and think of the other things, and cut short by the effects of unhealthy habits? How many families have been ripped apart? It doesn't just affect the person. It affects everyone around them who likely, because they love them and they hate to see what's happening to them. And the human nature from that perspective is to want them to stop, threaten them, beg them, whatever you feel like you need to do to get them to stop that destructive behavior. And ultimately, what it comes down to is the individual. If you get on that path, people can make suggestions, beg, threaten, offer, hey, maybe have you tried this program or whatever, but ultimately it's up to that person to solve that problem. Nobody else can make them fix it. And I would say it's up to that person with God's help. Okay? All right, moving on to, let's see, on to verses 29 through 35. The subtitle of that is The Portrait. So 29 through 32, let's read that again. And again, it kind of focuses more on the alcohol part. 29 through 32, so here's the picture. Who has woe? Who has sorrow? Who has conflicts? Who has complaints? Who has wounds for no reason? Who has red eyes? Those who linger over wine, those who go looking for mixed wine. Don't gaze at wine because it is red, because it gleams in the cup and goes down smoothly. In the end, it bites like a snake and stings like a viper. So again, the portrait. Look at this picture. Who has woe, sorrow, conflicts, complaints, wounds for no reason? Who has red eyes? Have you been around or seen anyone who's abused alcohol and drugs, one of the first places you can see it is in the eyes. They might be bloodshot, pupils dilated. There's, again, physiological things. And then, of course, I'm sure you've heard the word hangover, and that's after effects. Okay? So there may be some euphoria while you're partaking of alcohol or drugs, but there is a consequence, physical, physiological. And so the way that becomes dangerous is people want to avoid that downside, and they think perhaps, or their body tells them, let's do that again because I don't like this. I don't like this low. This is uncomfortable. This hurts. So I was feeling good when I was doing that substance. So let's do it again. And you can see the cycle there. All right. In the study guide, it says Solomon portrayed the abuse of alcohol in vivid terms. He described the appeal and enticements of alcohol, and that is in verse 31. It says it gleams in the cup and goes down smoothly. Okay. That's verse 31 you can see on the screen. On the front end, things seem good and acceptable. On the back end, the ramifications of alcohol abuse are horrible. The thought of escaping from the troubles of life by indulging in self-medication only adds to the initial allure. Okay, there's this first initial allure, the temptation, the thought, the suggestion by someone else, and then the thought of escaping from the troubles of life uh, adds to that, whatever the first temptation was. And the thought here says the consequences of alcohol abuse are many and varied. And again, I would say specifically alcohol and drug abuse. Here are consequences: the loss of reason, abusive and belligerent behavior, and even the open demonstration of the physical signs of alcohol abuse. Alcohol overpromises and under delivers. So again, those consequences: loss of reason, abusive and belligerent behavior. Even people say, "Oh, you're more fun, you're more funny when you're drinking or when you're doing drugs." And I would submit to you, as a sober person, around people who are abusing, overindulging alcohol and drugs. To me, taking an illicit drug is abusing. No matter there's no small enough amount that's not abusing and potentially dangerous to yourself. But as a sober person, if you haven't experienced it, hopefully you never have to. But as a sober person around those that are abusing or overindulging, they may think they're a lot funnier or more personable than they would be otherwise. But a lot of times they're not because their perception is skewed. And they're not quite as funny as they think they are. They're not quite as fun as they think they are. And just to put it bluntly, it can be annoying to be around people like that. Okay. Just that's for what it's worth. And again, that's from having been probably on both sides of that, thinking that I was, funnier than I really was, or more personable. All right. Now, to follow up on those thoughts, it says in the study guide, the culture in which we live today is inundated with all kinds of advertisements when it comes to the consumption of alcohol. And particularly when for young men or young ladies, I don't know if with women's sports or if it's sports in general, but certainly what have traditionally been kind of thought of as men's sports or that would attract men, professional basketball, football, baseball, those sorts of things. It's prevalent in any advertising, but certainly when you have attracted a crowd of people that watch sports, men or women. So it says the culture in which we live today is inundated with all kinds of advertisements when it comes to the consumption of alcohol. What is missing is the downside of the alcohol industry. If you pay attention to commercials for alcohol, it's always people getting together socially, having some fun. It's just part of being together. If you're going to have a party, you got to have alcohol. Or if you're going to get together to watch the Super Bowl or a football game, or it doesn't have to be a big event. Whatever it is, they kind of make it look like you want that alcohol there. You got your chips, you got your burgers, you're doing your tailgate. You got to have alcohol there. That's how they portray it. It's part of being social. What they don't portray in their advertisements, and for obvious reasons, is again the backside, the downside of that. the next morning when your head hurts, or God forbid, the next morning when you're in jail because you drove home from the party and got pulled over and got a DUI, or God forbid, you wake up in jail because you were driving home and you hurt or killed someone with a car. Okay? They don't portray that. They conveniently neglect that part. Okay, and so the study guide says those who abuse alcohol are portrayed as the people living the good life. What needs to be talked about are the ravaging effects of alcohol and other addictive substances on both individuals and families. Okay, so again, to bring it back to us, why what may seem like a very innocent thing can have devastating consequences. One sip of alcohol is very likely not going to kill you. Uh, you go beyond that, and now you're starting to lose control of yourself and how other people can influence you, physically or mentally. All right. All right. So the last part of the verses here, 33 through 35, the subtitle is called "The Problem" in the study guide. I'm on page 88. So the last verses, 33 through 35, to review them, it says, your eyes will see strange things, and you will say absurd things. So he's going to specifically talk about, you know, the effects, how you will be when you're drunk, okay, or under the influence of something. Your eyes will see strange things, and you will say absurd things. You will be like someone sleeping out at sea or lying down on top of a ship's mast. They struck me, but I feel no pain. They beat me, but I didn't know it. When will I wake up? I'll look for another drink. And again, with CSB, it's pretty kind of plain English there, and it's true. Here's how it describes it in the study guide. It says, in these verses, the description of the consequences of alcohol's use and abuse continue in vivid and stark terms. Solomon pictured the abuser of alcohol as someone who sees strange things, and in parentheses in the study guide, it says the loss of mental reasoning. Now, there you can literally hallucinate. If you, particularly with drugs, but if you even drink too much alcohol, your mind it affects your mind, and you may see. I guess I don't know if it's literally or figuratively, because there won't be the old thing they used to talk about was seeing pink elephants. If you're drunk, you're literally not going to see a pink elephant. So I guess it's figuratively because your mind has been so affected that you could hallucinate and see things, or hear things, or not see and hear things. That's where it's dangerous, particularly if you are doing something that requires all of your mental faculties. So it says, Solomon pictured the abuser of alcohol as someone who sees strange things, parentheses, the loss of mental reasoning, and will say all kinds of abusive or absurd things to others. And that's true as well. They say when you drink, it kind of loosens you up, you're more social. Well, part of that is what it's doing is it's reducing or taking away your inhibitions, where you might otherwise hold your tongue, both in the language that you use, and also the things that you might say about someone. When you start to lose your inhibitions, that means that you, by its definition, become uninhibited, and you kind of lose your filters, your ability to keep things unsaid that should stay unsaid. And you could hurt someone. Not to mention how it affects your witness. To relate it as a Christian, first of all, if someone sees you drinking or drunk or doing drugs and thinks, wait a minute, they're in Sunday school every week, they go to church, so their church allows them to do this, or their faith, and I would submit that it does not. Pastor Richard, he said just last week, he reminded us, and I think it was Sunday night, that he preaches total abstinence, and that's just because he says because of the effects that he is seeing on families and individual people. Okay, again, I am an advocate of total abstinence for that reason, plus from the practical aspect of try to sit down and catalog the good and the bad, the pros and the cons of drinking. It's expensive, it can uninhibit you, it can get you in trouble, it affects you for the rest of your life. On the good, What is the good? Well, I'll fit in. Uh, you know, I will be more likable, more fun. Again, maybe not. You may think that. So practically, to me, uh, that's why I am an abstainer and advocate abstinence. All right. So back to the lesson. Uh, People who abuse alcohol lose their mental capacities and the ability to demonstrate self-control. Only one thing matters for a person suffering from addiction. So this again takes it to the extreme: drugs, alcohol, specifically here. Only one thing matters for a person suffering from addiction. Not even being struck or beaten would be of greater concern. And again, that's the reference to in verse 35. They struck me, but I feel no pain. They beat me, but I didn't know it. What's the one thing that matters for a person suffering from addiction? The pressing problem has to do with getting another drink, as it says in the study guide, or another hit of drugs. That need alone would prompt someone who's drunk to wake up from the stupor brought on by the alcohol. And it becomes a craving. Your body convinces you that you need that drink or that drug. And I wrote a couple things in the study guide that it made me think of, and uh, I've seen the effects of this. When you get to the point to where you crave that alcohol, and drugs is, from my perspective or my perception, it's even worse with drugs because they're so addictive. But I'm sure alcohol may be the same way. Is that need is the overriding concern in your life, and it causes you to do things. And so, a couple of words I wrote down: deceptive. You don't want people to know that you have a problem, even if you recognize that you have that problem. Some people don't recognize they have a problem with addiction. But certainly, if you do, you're deceptive. You don't want people to know that. You will deny it. You will hide it. Another thing is thievery. You have to have money to purchase that alcohol or those drugs, unless you just steal alcohol and drugs. To get that money, how do you do it? My brother's house was broken into by people who stole a lot of things. A lot of people we have at our house, the pickle jar with our loose change in it or whatever. He had something similar to that. They took his piggy bank, for lack of a better word, coins, change, because you have to either get things to try to sell or trade for money or for other things, or actual steal money that you can afford this habit. So that is very destructive behavior. Breaking into someone's home can get you in a lot of trouble, if not killed. And then, of course, he was able to identify these guys, and so the sheriff's deputies went and arrested them. So there's that record thing again. All right. So the overriding concern is getting another drink or another drugs. Okay. To summarize this, the last paragraph on page 89 of the study guide, it says, with this description, the problem of alcohol and drug abuse has been underscored for believers. Okay. And that's the description of what it does to your life. Without question, it says the addictive behaviors and the consequences of alcohol and substance abuse can be devastating. And I know people that are in this Sunday school class have seen that in their lives, if not among their friends. Solomon's description in these verses of alcohol's effects challenge us to give the control of our bodies to the Lord alone. And again, that's the bottom line, is if we deliberately try to put God first in our life and our thoughts and our actions and our words, He will help us put a hedge of protection around us. And then again, it comes to us to make that choice or to deny that choice. Hopefully you have the strength in God and in your own personality to avoid it. I admit I fell when I was young. I'm older, smarter, stronger now when it comes to being able to avoid that. And I would certainly encourage people to lean on those around them to help them avoid the temptation. The bullets at the end of the lesson, here's just the summary of the four thoughts of the lesson. First, it says believers are to fear God alone, finding their security and hope in Him. The beginning of wisdom is the fear of the Lord. Okay, fear God alone to find your security and hope in Him. Second, believers are to associate with those pursuing a godly lifestyle. Again, can't emphasize that enough. Surround yourself with like-minded people, friends, family. You can't avoid the world, but you can insulate yourself to an extent by who you associate with. Third, the initial allure of intoxicating drinks and drugs, in parentheses by me, is replaced by abuse and heartache. If you allow it to get a hold of your life, it will result in abuse of that substance, and perhaps abuse of yourself and those around you, and heartache. And then finally, addiction leads to perpetual danger, physically. And then I would say for a Christian, you would really need to assess your life because you can certainly shorten your life. Salvation is assured once you're saved, but it will constantly affect you if you get into that trap of addiction. All right. Questions, comments? None? All right. Well, we'll end the lesson for this morning, and I'm glad that you were here with us.